My name is Nicole Wessel, and this is my summary and observations of the Great Debate. The Great Debate being the nearly half-century contention between Derek Freeman and Margaret Mead concerning their anthropological research and their differences of opinions of cultural versus biological determinism, better known to most as nature versus nurture. Margaret Mead went to Samoa as a young grad student. She was 23 years old, and this was at the request of her professor, Franz Boas, who was a strong proponent of cultural determinism. According to the BBC documentary Tales from the Jungle, Boas disagreed with the status quo in 1920s anthropology concerning this debate. The majority of anthropologists at this time believed non-whites were both genetically and biologically inferior to whites. Boas disagreed. Boas had a strong background in and passion for adolescent studies and chose Margaret Mead to conduct a study in Samoa to help support his claims of nurture over nature. One criticism that Freeman has of Mead's work is that she went to Samoa with this predetermined agenda toward defending cultural determinism, which skewed her research. We learn in Tales from the Jungle that in Samoa, Mead chose to learn the local language, which was unusual at the time. However, another criticism of Freeman's and others is that Mead had a limited ability of the language. She only had about 500 words of Samoan. Mead also chose to live outside of the local villages. In the article, The Attack on and Defense of Margaret Mead, Glick mentions Freeman's argument that Mead couldn't get in an accurate picture of the Samoan society by living outside of it. However, Glick contends Freeman fails to mention Margaret Mead's location allowed her to observe and interview adolescent girls from 3 separate villages, which gave her a larger pool of research subjects. Margaret Mead was in Samoa for 9 months, starting in August 1925. Some claim this was not enough time to fully observe the culture. Derek Freeman was in Samoa for 2.5 years. However, Freeman went to Samoa in 1942, nearly 2 decades later than Margaret Mead. Many say Mead saw a Samoa less influenced by westernization than Derek Freeman, and this is a big reason their findings are drastically different. Mead's focus was also on adolescents, and specifically interviewed adolescent girls, whereas Derek Freeman focused more on adult observations in Samoan society. According to Tales from the Jungle, Margaret Mead's findings included that children do not form a strong attachment to one person, that Samoan adolescents lack aggression and sulliness like American adolescents, and Samoan adolescents are freer in experimenting with their sexuality. In Coming of Age in Samoa, Margaret Mead wrote about her research of adolescence in Samoa. She determined that the vast differences between Samoan and American teenagers and their relationships with each other and family showed cultural determinism was a much stronger influence on one's personality and behavior than biological determinism. Derek Freeman's findings were vastly different. He found that virginity was revered in Samoan society, that Samoan families have many similar difficulties as American families, and he found Margaret Mead's research to be lacking. Now, according to the Attack on and Defense of Margaret Mead article, Freeman used many historical documents and relied on interviews with chiefs to conduct most of his research. Many dispute Derek Freeman's accusations of Mead in his book, Mead and Samoa. His research was much later and in a different part of Samoa than Margaret Mead. He used resources different than Mead's, mainly adults, and therefore got an adult view of family and adolescence. Many find his example of the virgin ceremony, showing how Samoans revered virginity, as inaccurate because it was a small upper-class group that participates in this practice. Derek Freeman determines from his findings that biological determinism is the strongest factor in personality and behavior, refueling the nature versus nurture debate. In my opinion, both cultural and biological determinism play a role in forming one's personality from birth into adulthood. However, cultural difference can be a much stronger influence and sometimes supersede any biological effects. Mead was young and on her first solo cultural study abroad when she went to Samoa. Many mistakes were most likely made, but anthropologists have continued to support her work to this day, which leads me to believe that there is much truth in what she found. Although Derek Freeman had a brief success getting support for his refute of Margaret Mead's research, the anthropological community has for the most part defended Mead. mainly because her methods were revolutionary at the time and helped to shape modern anthropological research. I believe Derek Freeman found and documented much more about Samoan culture than did Margaret Mead in her day. However, I do not think his findings refute hers. They were done at different times, interviewing different people. Both culture and biology have an effect on who we are, but cultural determinism ultimately can have the greatest effect.